it looks like there's about 1 minute until it's time to start. For those of you who are here, things look a little bit different tonight. Adam is still right next to me, only it's on the screen and not sitting right next to me, with things getting a little bit more scary in the world, and some of the stuff that the president said yesterday about, the increase in cases and some of the stuff that's maybe coming down the pike in the next 2 weeks. I thought maybe it would be best if we just kept our distance and tried to follow the rules a little bit more. So Adam and I are in different locations, but we're in the same place, and we decided to get super fancy with the PowerPoint screen next to us tonight.
Yes, the kitchen table has gone digital, but we will not miss a beat except when the laptop accidentally doubles up on our sounds.
The kitchen table has gone digital. Okay, well, it looks like it's 7 o'clock at my end, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Just watching on the screen up there right now, it looks like there's about 45 people logged in watching us. Thank you very much for sharing this time with Adam and me tonight. We really appreciate it. If you have not been with us, if this is your first time, whenever this started a couple of weeks ago, I didn't finish the Acts study that we were studying in our regular worship time. I thought, let's go ahead and work on some other material. And so I've been scrambling to put together some stuff that I needed to do anyway. And so we're going to talk about God's rest as we see it throughout the Bible in lots of different ways. This is the way that I'm treating it, and I think it's the way that Adam is treating it also. Even though, I got a PowerPoint and I got some notes here in front of me and things that I want to say, I'm really kind of treating it like a casual conversation. We're just talking. I really appreciate Adam. He's got a great point of view on different things, and so he's throwing out some stuff. But Adam is a million times better than me in every way, and one of the ways is that he's able to multitask, and so he is also watching the comments. So really, this is the third time I think that both of us have done this, and so we're learning, and this is new to us too. But really encourage you to make your comments there in the comment bar, and Adam will convey those to me, and we'll try to make this a little more conversational. Adam, you got anything you want to say before we get started tonight?
No, that's it. Just we've got some questions teed up that I'll be dropping in as we go throughout the discussion. So like Ryan said, we want as many different viewpoints as we can get, just to add different perspectives and add into the conversation. So yeah, it's perfect.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started, and I will get started just by changing the screen up here. This is what we talked about last time. Genesis chapter 2 and verses 1 through 3 really has kind of been my bouncing spot. This is the place where we start thinking about God's rest and what God intended and created for all people, for the whole world from the beginning of time. And so what we did last time was to talk about if God intended rest in Genesis 2 and peace and blessedness, every good thing from the start, how in the world did we get to where we are? And that really is Genesis chapters 3 through 12, 3 through 11, I guess. We talked about the fall of creation. There's about 9 different things in Genesis chapter 3 about blaming people and not looking out for other people and all kinds of bad stuff, the curses and death and separation from God. In Genesis 4, we talked about Cain and how God sent him away from his presence because of sin and cast him out as a restless wanderer. There is no rest, and he has no place to settle down. In Genesis chapter 5, lots of people might look at that and call it a boring chapter, but it's really I think, a good illustration of our problem. It's just one person after the next. And he lived and he died. And he lived and he died. And he lived and he died. Everybody dies. Genesis 6 starts the flood. It's a picture of total corruption. The thoughts and the intentions of the hearts of man were just only evil continually all the time. And then in Genesis 11, you have the story of Babel, where everybody is trying to come together. They're trying to build their city and to be together in one place so they don't have to be restless wanderers. And it just doesn't work. Man is not capable. This material is called God's rest. It's God's. It belongs to him. He created it and he gives it. We can't do it by ourselves. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to talk about God's rest and how we get there. All right, that's just by way of review. Anything that I missed?
No, I think last week was a lot about that downward spiral as people move further and further from God's rest. And I think this class is going to be useful to think about the rest, not only that God built into creation, but that he built in with the Sabbath day, and sort of tracing that through the early times of God and his people and what he intended with the Sabbath rest, and what does Sabbath look like for us now, which I think is something that we misunderstand sometimes. And it's worth thinking about what is our Sabbath, and what is the rest, not only that we enjoy today, but the rest to come as well. So I'm looking forward to talking through that.
Excellent. Awesome. That's perfect. One thing that I didn't do last week, like I said, I'm kind of caught up. For the first two classes, I was scrambling to get my notes together. And so, a lot of this stuff was things that I've already said at Ellisville before. But one of the things that I did not have in the notes, I'll throw this up here. In both Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, there are blessings and curses. If you obey me and do all the things that I'm telling you to do, you're going to be blessed, and here's what I'm going to do for you. But if you don't obey me, then you're going to be cursed, and here are the curses. In Deuteronomy 28, in verse 20, the Lord will send on you curses. And listen to what some of the curses are, the first ones. Confusion and frustration in all that you undertake to do. Doesn't that sound a lot like what we're talking about with the stress and the anxiety and the things that people in our world are facing? In verse 64, the Lord will scatter you among all the peoples from one end of the earth to the other. There you shall serve other gods of wood and stone, which neither you nor your fathers have known. And among these nations, listen to what's going to happen to the people when they move away from God and choose not to obey him. He says, among these nations, you will find no respite. There will be no resting place for the sole of your feet. The Lord will give you there a trembling heart, failing eyes. I think of failing eyes as like sadness, and a languishing soul. And so really, the curse here that goes along with not being with God and staying close to God, obeying God, being in fellowship with God, the curses are just summarized with no rest, no peace. Anyway, That's all backwards stuff. Go ahead.
Right. We think about that as an Old Testament concept or an Old Testament curse, but it seems like that's still continuing today, that so much of the world, and that's how we sort of frame the problem, is defined by this lack of rest and peace and the chaos that we see around us, and try to figure out, how do we deal with this?
Yeah. Oh, man, isn't that just... And as if we didn't already know it. The world, we could have had this conversation 3 weeks ago and it would have been just as true. But it's just right in our faces right now. It's so clear. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about God's Sabbath rest. And Susan Bailey wrote this. I think it was our first class when we were talking about Sabbath. She said that Sabbath is unhindered fellowship with God. I want to go backwards just a minute in Genesis chapter 2 and verses 1 through 3 and look at the intent. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw up 3 different slides here with a quote. let me read Genesis 2 first. It says, "The heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation." David McClister is a teacher at Florida College. He's there now. He was one of my teachers, one of my favorite teachers whenever
So
I
you've been
was
there a
there.
long time then, huh?
Oh,
You've got to be
man.
close to retirement,
Oh, it stings even through the computer.
right?
Um, yeah, he wrote an article, and I'll cite that here at the end of this quote. He wrote an article, and I think you can find it probably on the internet. I don't know, but he really helped to shape my view of the Sabbath and understanding what the Sabbath is and what makes it the Sabbath. Here's how it starts. When God entered into rest after creating the world, it was with the intention of enjoying fellowship with the man he had made with the capability of that fellowship. So God makes Adam and Eve for the purpose of resting and enjoying fellowship with them. God had placed Adam and Eve in a place that was ready-made for them, a place that would sustain them comfortably. All they needed to live was provided for them so they would not be burdened with having to labor for their survival. In such an environment, God had made it possible for man to live without giving all his time, energy, and thought to staying alive. With their survival provided by God, Adam and Eve were supposed to direct their attention to God. And so you see what he's pointing out here in Genesis chapter 2, when God created everything and then rested with the intent of enjoying fellowship, unhindered fellowship with the man and the woman that he created. Was here we go, guys. I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to give you everything that you need to survive. There was no curse yet, no toiling and struggling and trying to survive by the sweat of your brow. I'm going to provide for you and give you everything that you need, so that, this is the big point, so that if you don't have to focus on all that stuff, you can focus on me instead. And so the intent was, I will provide for you. We can be together. And the best thing, Adam and I were talking about this before we got started. The best way that I know to illustrate this is as a camp director. My job as a camp director is to equip my staff with everything that they need so that they can do the job that they need to do. And if I do my job and I give you what you need, then you can do your job and everything works the way that it's supposed to go. That's like God in the Garden of Eden. I'm going to give you everything you need to survive. And after I give that to you, it's just me and you. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a really different and helpful way to think about God's blessings, that they're not just, I'm going to give you something because I love you, which is great in and of itself, but it's, I'm going to give you something. The phrase I would use is to set the table so that you are able to focus on spiritual blessings. I'm going to take care of you first in the garden, and we'll get to taking care of the Israelites in the wilderness so that you don't have to be as worried about the day-to-day things that you need, and you can spend some of your time and energy directly with me. And I think we can even see that in our lives, that God gives us blessings, takes care of us, and even a blessing as simple as like having a weekend. It's time that we can step back and spend first with family and then with God and his people. We still get blessings like that today that are ultimately blessings that we can use for his purposes.
Yeah. Awesome. I like that. I didn't think about that. I really love your input on that, where it's not just giving a blessing for the sake of, I love you, here's a blessing. It's giving a blessing to alleviate a need to get that. That's what we're talking about. Unhindered fellowship with God. Get the hindrance out of the way so that it can be us. I'm glad you said it that way, Adam. Let's go to Exodus chapter 16. And this is the second place where you see the idea of a Sabbath. And what's the most interesting to me about this one in Exodus chapter 16 is that the Ten Commandments, when we think of the Sabbath, we normally think of this is the fourth commandment coming from God. That hasn't happened yet. That's not until Exodus 20. And so here comes the Sabbath into the world prior to the Ten Commandments. And I'm going to read in verses 2 and 3, Exodus 16, 2 and 3. The whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, "Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." I think that that's something we probably shouldn't miss. The thing that was their hindrance, their stumbling block, was their need for food. And legit, they were hungry. And so they needed food. God says in verse 4, I'm going to rain bread from heaven down. In verse 5, on the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as you gather daily. So here we see the idea of a Sabbath. Jump over to verses 22 through 30. I want to read this whole section. Exodus 16, starting in verse 22. On the sixth day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers each. And when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake, boil what you will boil. All that is left over lay aside to be kept until the morning." So they laid it aside till the morning as Moses commanded them, and it did not stink. There were no worms in it. And Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, which is a Sabbath, there will be none." And the idea is, here comes the Sabbath. I'm going to provide food for you. You're not going to have to go out and work for it. I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to provide for you so that we can do the Sabbath thing. Jump down to about verses 29 and 30. "See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the 6 days, he gives you bread for 2 days. Remain each of you in his place. Let no one go out of the place the seventh day." So the people rested on the seventh day. If I was about 20 years younger, then I would have emoji clapping hands. So the people rested on the seventh day. That's the point, right? That's what God is saying.
Can you see that? Can you see my clapping hands?
Oh, all right. Technology at its finest. Look at this. More from David McClister. Just 2 more, and then I'll stop with the quotes. "The Sabbath was a time when the Israelites were relatively free from the concerns of their physical existence. It was a day in which they lived not because they had worked on that day, but because God blessed them." Now, if you're a Christian and you're hearing that sentence right there, there's all kinds of, ding, 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 salvation, grace, mercy, not because you worked, but because God blessed you. It was the day they lived by God's hand and not their own. God was doing for Israel with the manna what he had done for Adam and Eve with the garden. The Israelites might not be distracted with their survival and instead turn their attention to God. And so here we get to your first question, I think, Adam. I don't know if it's your first one that you've posted into the comments, but one of the things that you said earlier was, let's talk about some of the barriers to our rest. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I was just going to share a couple of the current comments that we'd had going around, just sort of introducing the Sabbath and the significance of the Sabbath. And Becky said, it's sad how much we all want to fill up every moment of our schedules and just sort of give our leftover scraps of time to God, which I think is one of the key points that we're going to be driving at. Steve Shetlaw had said that the Sabbath has always been about having the trust to enjoy Jehovah's blessings. And that's what we see with Israel having to gather the double portion and trust that it wasn't going to rot and God was going to take care of them. And then one more from Amanda, talking about that it really forces more trust and is an opportunity to shift our focus from the physical to the spiritual. And I think that's a steady theme that we see is I'm going to, as God, lift your mind off of the physical, take care of you so that you have the opportunity to spend time with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think that is, I'll pose that next question that we were talking about of what are the barriers? Why are we not enjoying that rest to the fullest extent that we can be?
I got a little formula here. I wonder if this will work to have it in formula form. God said that he was going to provide for us so that we can focus our attention on him and be in perfect, unhindered fellowship with him. And so here's the formula. I'm not sure if formula is the right word. Sorry. But here's the statement, I guess. What is the thing causing your stress or your anxiety, whatever it might be? It might be work or school or, the idea of status, living up to something for other people to see or living up to something for your own self. I don't know what it is. What is the thing causing your stress or your anxiety? And then in the context of this Sabbath conversation, would that thing be better if, number one, you put your trust in God to provide what you need to make it through life, to provide what you need to make it through the situation, trust in God. And number two, trusted in God and devoted more of your time and effort and focus towards fellowship with him. So here's the thing. What's the stress? I mean, get it in your mind. What's the stress? And would that stress be better if I trusted God to provide for me and spent my time in fellowship with him? Would those two things fix our problem? I'm not making a point, I'm asking a question.
Yeah, and I think, that in some ways I would call that the goal of this whole study is to learn to train our minds to realize that God is in control, that he is taking care of us, and that he is providing a rest for us, even when our lives often don't feel restful. Learning how to sort of seek him out and spend time with him and strip away these distractions and stresses so that we can actually have the opportunity to commune. I think about sometimes, even when I'm trying to spend quality time with Erica, you come home with so many other burdens and things on your mind that sometimes it takes a long time before you're really present in the room. Or sometimes you end up saying, wow, I almost never even got there tonight. And God is trying in his way to take care of us and to teach us to trust in him so that we're not constantly carrying all those burdens on our own and that we are able to really connect with him.
Yeah. Wow. Are there any things coming in from the comments before I move on to Exodus 20 there?
I think we're good to move on for now.
Okay. Exodus 20. Now see, here's what's interesting to me. Where are we? We're 22 minutes into this study. We've talked about rest in Genesis 2, God's Sabbath in Genesis 2, God's Sabbath in Exodus 16 in the wilderness. Those are not the two things that I think of first most of the time. Exodus 20 is what I think of first most of the time. It's the fourth command in the 10 commands, and starting in verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, the sojourner who is with you in your gates. And then this is important, starting in verse 11. He says, here's the Sabbath, don't do any work on the Sabbath. And then in verse 11 he throws out and here's the reason why. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. There's really just one thing that I intend to say about this. Number one, of the 10 commandments, the Sabbath is the one that I have had the most trouble with. And the one that I think I hear other people having the most trouble with. Because we're Christians and we're New Testament Christians. And you go through and you're like, no other gods. Got it. No graven images. Right. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. Honor your father and your mother. Don't kill people. Don't cheat on your wife. Don't steal. All these different things. And we're like, yes, this is Christianity. And with the Sabbath, we either observe the Passover and we just pretend like it's not there, or we say, oh, that's Old Testament stuff. That Sabbath, that's an Old Testament thing. That doesn't apply to us. But in this context, if we go back to Genesis 2 and we say, this is what God intended from the very start, and if we start thinking of Sabbath rest in terms of what Jesus accomplishes for us, this is the most messianic of all the commands. It's not the one that we should skip over. It's the one that we should be paying a lot of attention to. So, I just throw that out because I get irritated about that one at myself.
Yeah, I don't want to get you too far off what we were sort of planning, but sometimes you hear, oh, no, we do observe the Sabbath. It's Sunday. And, it used to be Saturday and now it's Sunday. And sort of in what ways would you say maybe some of that is there? And in what ways is that kind of taking too narrow a view of what the Sabbath is now?
Right. Yeah. I think that first of all, I think that the answer to that question is going to be next Wednesday when we talk about the Sabbath year and the Jubilee. And what we're really going to do is we're kind of overviewing the Sabbath generally today. And then what we're going to do next Wednesday is we're going to really tie the Sabbath in a lot of ways to Jesus. And so my answer to the question of Sunday is the Sabbath is to say, you are 100% absolutely right. Sunday is the Sabbath. And so is Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and Saturday. Because when you're a Christian and Jesus has provided us the rest that all of this stuff is foreshadowing ultimately, my entire life in Christ is rest with God. And so this big Sabbath picture, this is just a big fat picture of what it means to be in unhindered fellowship with God, which that's what Jesus is. So yeah, Sunday's the Sabbath. So is every other day.
Right. We're not going to limit our communion and our time and our fellowship with God to just one day out of the week.
Yeah, I know what you were asking. I was being
it's a good way to frame it. So yeah, I think that was helpful.
All right. Is there anything that I need to stop here before I go on to the next one?
No, I appreciate seeing all the good comments roll in. I guess I said no. I will share one comment from Jory Stringer, and she said, in thinking about the stress of raising children, my perspective changed when I truly rested in God's provision for my girls. He was way ahead of me, and my part became easier and more joyful. And I think that's right in line with what we're talking about just learning to trust and then reaping the benefits of that in terms of closeness with God.
Yeah. Hi, Jory. I really miss seeing you around. All right. Exodus 31 is the next one. I think Exodus 31 is really cool, especially whenever you look at the context. Exodus 31 is what you might refer to as like the Sabbath law. This is where we start to get into some of the details of some of this stuff. So Exodus 20, 10 Commandments, God and Israel coming together at Mount Sinai. 21 to 23 is the Book of the Covenant. If your ox kills somebody, this is what you need to do with it. If we're going to live in a covenant with God, these are the rules. This is how you live. Exodus 24 is the actual marriage ceremony, where the covenant between God and his people becomes an actual thing. And then in Exodus, now that we have a covenant with God, you've got Exodus 25 through 30, which is, okay, you have a relationship with me. Now let's talk about the tabernacle and the place where I'm going to be and where you're going to meet me and where we're going to come together and how you're going to sacrifice and all of these different, and the people, the priests who are going to be there and all of that. And so we have covenant, we've got place of the covenant, And then in 31, in verse 12, now we have really the pinnacle. The covenant is all about unhindered fellowship and rest with God. And we've talked about all the details about that covenant and how and where and all this. And then we finally, in verse 12, we get to the details. The Lord said to Moses, "You are to speak to the people of Israel and say," listen to this, "above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths. This is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath, because it is holy for you. Everyone who profanes it shall be put to death." Remember that. We're going to come back to that at the end of this. "Whoever does any work on it, that soul shall be cut off from among the people. 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall be put to death. Therefore the people of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, observing the Sabbath throughout their generations as a covenant forever." 17 and 18. Okay, we read a bunch of this stuff. Start paying attention again. The Sabbath. "It is a sign forever between me and the people of Israel, that in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. And he gave to Moses, when he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, the 2 tablets of the testimony written with the finger of God." I'm sorry, I should have done 16 and 17, not 17 and 18, but the Sabbath is really important. Do the Sabbath. Are you starting to follow now? I think you have a question coming up about how does Jesus view the Sabbath differently from the Pharisees in the New Testament?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I think I jumped that question for you right there.
Oh, you're fine. No, we'll
But
keep going.
do you see, you see the Sabbath in God's intent for unhindered fellowship. God is going to provide so that people can be with him and focus on him. And it's one day. We're talking about this stress and this anxiety and the burdens of life and this heavy weight that we all carry around. And one day out of the week in the Old Testament, God says, "All right, you guys have messed everything up with sin. You've broken my perfect creation, but I love you. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to provide for you this one day, and we're going to have one day where we can be together." Can you appreciate just how stupid it is then in passages like Matthew chapter 12, where Jesus and the disciples are walking through the grain field, plucking heads of grain, and Luke says they're rubbing it between their hands, and the Pharisees get all worked up. "You're working on the Sabbath. You shouldn't be working on the Sabbath." Can you appreciate how stupid that is when you consider what God intended from the very start? It is just completely ridiculous. Sorry, I get myself all worked up.
No, I think, it helped me see, going through those passages again, about Jesus working on the Sabbath. And it seems like sometimes, or a lot of times, he intentionally chose to do a miracle on the Sabbath to bring out this difference between him truly doing good on the Sabbath versus the Pharisees sort of binding all these extra regulations and tripping over themselves while missing the point. And you realize, the more that we come to understand the Sabbath, this was the best time to do a healing or an act from God, because this is the day of fellowship. This is the day of God's provision. This is the day of God's rest. So it does, the more that we understand it, make the Pharisees' outrage more laughable, and you really see how far off they were.
Right. Yeah, it is just so. And, I don't want to point the finger and be like, "Oh, you ridiculous Pharisees." I think if you take the formula, you can do this with lots of things, and I can do it in my own life with lots of things. God says, "Here is some good blessing that I'm going to give to you in order for you and me to be together." And I turn it into some sort of overbearing rule and inflict that rule as a burden and a heavy weight on other people when it was intended to be. I mean, the intent from the beginning is, I want to be with my people. And the Pharisees said, how dare you pluck heads of grain? I would really want to learn something from that lesson so that I don't walk down that road and make that same mistake.
Yeah, Amanda said in the comments it's a get to on the Sabbath versus a have to. And the Pharisees did get so focused on the what, and Jesus was focused on the why and the blessing of being with God on that day. And I think you see that difference play out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Awesome. So, Adam, I'm going to go to Deuteronomy 5 now.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you just hit the nail right on the head when you talked about Jesus, and over again in the Gospels. This is the thing that seems to have made his opponents more upset than anything else. It's not that he was healing people. It's that he was doing it on the Sabbath. And Jesus was kind of a boat rocker, I think, because he went into the synagogue where they all were to do it on the Sabbath. So it's kind of like, hey, everybody, watch this, But in Deuteronomy 5, so in Exodus 20, you have the first telling of the Ten Commandments. And the Sabbath in Exodus 20 is, for in 6 days God created the heavens and the earth. It's do the Sabbath to remember Genesis 2. That's not what we see in Deuteronomy 5. In Deuteronomy 5, the children of Israel have been freed from Egypt. They've wandered for 40 years. They're on the cusp of entering into the promised land. And so the Ten Commandments are given a second time to this generation to say, hey, it's true for you too. And so look in verse 12. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy. As the Lord your God commanded you, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but in the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord. And then look at verse 15. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. So, initially, the Sabbath is, remember God's original intent for humanity. I'm going to provide for you so we can be together in fellowship. But a lot of time has passed, and now God is saying, remember the Sabbath. And it's not just my original intent, it's that I have saved you. I have saved you from the burden of slavery. And if we start drawing New Testament thoughts like we're going to next time, I have delivered you from this overwhelming burden of sin and slavery and oppression and hardship. I brought you out of that, of all the days of the week, to remember God's salvation. This is a day to remember what God has done. And so why not heal people on the Sabbath? Why not do miracles on the Sabbath? The Sabbath is all about God and his fellowship and his salvation.
We talk about the way that God would remove barriers so that people could focus on him. I wonder if you could almost even see the healings of Jesus as doing that too. I'm going to remove this physical barrier so that you can give glory to God and you can tell your story and you can show his goodness in your life. You can see that theme getting built.
Yeah. I would think now's probably a really good time to start thinking about, what are the barriers between me and God? What is the thing hindering me from fellowship with God? Can I trust God to remove that hindrance so that we can get back to the original intent? And next week I'll talk more specifically about that. But so many of us live our lives with the barrier up, and we don't even take the time to think about what the barrier is. What is that thing preventing me from unhindered fellowship with God? And I would think for a lot of us, the stress and anxiety and the burdens of life are probably a huge part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I really just have a couple more things, and then I think I'll wrap up. Is there anything in the comments you want me to stop for?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. in Exodus 31, in verses 14 and 15, a second ago, we saw the punishment for for not observing the Sabbath. The punishment is death. And, I would imagine if somebody's watching this, some person who's not tracking with me on spiritual things here. This is the kind of thing where people in the world will read through the Old Testament and will be like, what kind of God do you serve? If you work on Saturday, your God's going to put you to death? What? It sounds ridiculous to a lot of us. But now that we've seen, we've talked about the Sabbath and God's intent and what the Sabbath is, to have this day of unhindered fellowship. I'm going to just throw this question out to you, I guess, since it's not going to have time to make it out. Why do you think it's such a big deal to God when people refuse to observe the Sabbath and continue on with their work as if it's any other day? Why is that such a big deal to God?
Yeah, I think we've mapped out what the Sabbath represents and the fact that it is special time with God. And so when you basically in the Old Testament willingly trade that for a chance at a little more profit or a little more time in my fields or a little more whatever, it's you saying, you know what, that's the choice that I'm going to make over time with God. And I'm not willing to sacrifice that bit of provision for myself and trust in God's ability to provide. And so I think it's so much more than just the action. It's the symbolism behind it of rejecting God's plan and God's design.
Yeah. So the Sabbath is this time of, I'm going to provide for you so that we can have fellowship. And to refuse to observe the Sabbath and continue as life as normal is to say, I don't trust you to provide for me, or no thank you, and I don't want that fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically, this is literally turning your back on God and saying, thanks, but no thanks. These fish aren't going to catch themselves.
Yeah, I think you referenced some of the verses from the minor prophets where people just, what a weariness the Sabbath is, wish it could hurry up and be over. Because for them, the desire to prosper was first and foremost. And we think about barriers. I think that's a real barrier that I see in myself and that I think can see in society is that I need to get ahead. I need to do a little more work. I need to put in these hours. I need to, sometimes we can call it providing for our family, but most of the time, at least in my mind, it's a desire for excess or desire for more that would possibly take my heart away, just like the people in the Old Testament who didn't want to make the time for the Sabbath. And I think you can show up to church and make time for God without fully committing to that and really making time for God and making place for God in your life.
Yeah. Good stuff, Adam. You've talked about the minor prophets. Amos chapter 8 and verse 5. Here are people. God is sick of these people, and he quotes them. He says, this is what you say. When will the new moon be over, that we can go back to selling our grain? When will the Sabbath be over so we can go back to selling our wheat? This is God, thank you for the fellowship. I got work to do. That's not okay. There's another one. I'm not going to read this one. If you want to write this down, I'm going to turn past it here pretty quick. But Nehemiah chapter 13, starting in verse 15 through 17, Nehemiah is trying to restore a city of worship and devotion to God. And one of the things that he's dealing with, I'm going to read, I guess I said I wasn't going to, but I'm going to. Verse 16, people from Tyre who live in the city, they're bringing their fish of all kinds, goods, they're selling them on the Sabbath to the people in Jerusalem itself. And Nehemiah goes and confronts the people of Judah, and he says, what are you doing profaning the Sabbath day? God has saved our entire nation, and you can't just stop your work for one day to enjoy fellowship and rest with him. It really is. I think when you see the Sabbath for what it is, we're not talking about you're breaking the rules. We're talking about you're rejecting God. that's really the heart of what's going on here. Okay. Anything in the comments before I do the last section?
No, I think I hope everyone knows I still see good comments rolling in, but I just want us to be able to kind of get to our final application point here. But definitely do appreciate the good comments. But bring us home, Ryan.
Oh, yeah. I would say for Adam, for those of you watching, Adam is listening to me live through Zoom. So this is happening in real time. But there's about a 30 to 45 second lag between what you're hearing, what we're saying. So I'm 45 seconds ahead before you even hear what I say. And then you make your comments, and Adam is trying to listen to me and process what I said a minute ago. And so I'm telling you, this guy needs a cape. He's a superhero. I told him, you can do it if you want, but I sure can't do it. Okay, practical point number 1. Just practical for today. We're all slowing down, right? A little bit. Because we're forced to stay at home. In the context of this Sabbath conversation, where God says, I'm going to provide for you, and you need to trust me that I'm going to provide for you so that we can have unhindered fellowship with one another. Could there be any benefit in this coronavirus situation surrounding this subject and this topic right now? I mean, I see all kinds of people, they're eating meals at home with their family, they're going on walks with their family at the park, stuff that we didn't have time for that before. I would like to think that we're staying at home, that we're studying together as a family and growing together as a family. I would think that if we take this idea of God's going to take care of me, I trust him, he's going to provide for me. The job situation might be really bad right now. I mean, I don't discount that. The health situation is really bad right now. I don't discount that. I trust that God is going to provide for me in my time of need. And when I put my trust in him, I'm going to spend my time focusing and connecting and having that unhindered fellowship with him. I think that this coronavirus situation could really be beneficial to get our minds back moving in that direction.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to say it, because it obviously goes without saying that there is so much hardship going on in this, and it's a terrible situation, and yet there are things that we can take advantage of and use. And I caught myself saying at the end of a conversation the other day, well, I got to run, and it's like, no, I don't. Like,
Yeah.
especially once my work day is over, you don't have anywhere to be, and you don't have to rush off to the next thing. And it's almost hard to get used to that, but it can be a great thing, especially, I think what we've talked about tonight is not just slowing down for the sake of slowing down, which can be nice, but it's slowing down for the sake of building our relationship with God and investing and using this opportunity to really grow close to him.
Yeah. It's kind of like, if you want to think about it like this, it's kind of like a forced Sabbath.
Yeah.
Don't work on this day so that you can be in fellowship with me. This is an opportunity to say, okay, I'm resting. Now my job is to enjoy that fellowship with God.
Yep.
Okay. I'm done